Right now, though, we put Britain's managers under the cat o' nine tails, analysing how they can help nail down the deal, not just at the end of the negotiating process either, but by choosing the right sales team, how they can empower their sales team. C-suite strategy to achieve consistent sales growth is the name of the game, and to play it with me here are some gentlemen with impeccable credentials and experience. Please look at their biographies in the programmes, would you? It's an impressive look. Let me introduce otherwise Kelvin, whom you know, Chief Exec of Technology Associates. He's alongside Richard Busby, CEO of BDS Sponsorship, that'll be familiar to you, and Luke Adams, Chief Executive of Digital Blank. Give them a round of applause to welcome them to the stage, chaps. Well, getting the chief officers of your business involved to facilitate or close deals is not new. C-suite strategy, right? Kelvin, I'll ask you first. Why is it a buzz phrase now?
Well, I think C-suite, like most phrases in sales, they come and go. And I think it's being used to sort of encapsulate the whole concept of getting to the right people in the organisation. I think one of the problems is it's not always the right people. In terms of, it depends what you're selling and who you need to sell to actually make the sale at the end of the day. Because actually the C-suite may not necessarily be the decision makers at the end of the day. They are influenced by the people who work below them typically. At least that's our experience. So again, it's C-suite as a term, I think is again one of those buzz phrases, and we may see it disappear and morph into something else going forward.
And maybe it's about the zeitgeist at the moment, maybe it's post-austerity, maybe it's about the idea of, pardon the pun again, all hands on deck at the moment. Maybe that's what we're looking at, is it, with a new digital future ahead of us as well?
Perhaps, yes.
Okay, well listen, we're going to talk a little bit about how Chief Executive Officers can help with the negotiating process and certainly with the closing of the deal in a minute. But let's start at the start, and I guess right the way back to recruitment, Luke. This is where your executive officers can really make a permanent difference from the get-go.
Yeah, if we're looking at motivation of the sales staff, in particular of high performers, so some of the sales team that I've worked with are on $1 million a year. So how do you keep those people motivated if they're on $1 million a year? But even down to the juniors, how do you get them to come in and day to day, depending on whatever they're selling, whether it's something for $10 or something for 7 figures onwards. And the way we do it, and the way Digital Blank works, is we've got 450 partners. So we've actually got 450 times their sales team that we're motivating. And some of those people are earning over $1 million a year. So what do we do to do that? And it's really about understanding the salesperson. Each salesperson has a persona. I'm an introvert. I'm dyslexic. I've even got an element of ADHD. I would be very different to someone who is an extrovert, someone who likes to hold court. I remember when I first moved into sales, wasn't for money. It was, I saw when I was 17, the girls on the other side of the desk that were talking to the sales guys. I was in IT, and he had an XR3i. I wanted that. I didn't want to be stuck behind a computer. But as an introvert, I had no knowledge of the world. I couldn't articulate a conversation with someone much older than me. But that was my goal. And those goals shift. And it's about understanding what the salesperson wants and what motivates him.
What could those motivators be, for example?
Well, it could be time. Time with their family. It could be travel. I mean, one of the big motivators when I was in the direct selling was I didn't want to pay for certain things out of my own money. So the incentives, like travel, for example, to 5-star, I didn't want to pay for that myself because that impacted my loved ones, my family, etc. So I liked incentives that I didn't want to pay for corporate hospitality in football. I didn't want to pay for those tickets.
Well, talking about corporate hospitality and sponsorship and things like that, Richard, but addressing that theme, motivating your sales force.
I think it's
quite close.
I think that things like travel are good, but I'd go a stage further. I think it's, as you say, analysing the psychology of the individual. And I think that one of the psychologies of everybody, but the triggers may be different, is giving them something after their award that is a memorable experience and they can talk to their fellow salespeople about. So, for example, one of the things that we did as a motivator is we did some work for the old Wembley Stadium, and we got the benches from the England dressing rooms and used them as a sales promotion, as a sales incentive. And the person who actually sold the most actually got the benches from the England dressing room and was able to post photos and invite his friends around, and all the other sales staff, I hasten to add. A similar example is UPS. When they sponsored the Olympics, they created a whole series of incentive schemes which were above their normal incentive schemes, not only for the sales force where they massively increased their targets, but equally for the non-sales force, who opened about 1,300 or 1,500 new major accounts, and even to the extent of reducing accidents with their drivers. So they actually got 100% no accident, no fault driving shot up in terms of numbers. So you can link things together. But I think that things like memorable experience is something that feeds ego. Money is not about ego unless they boast about it.
Well, if you look at footballers, Ronaldo, Messi, they're not doing it for the money now. They've got enough money. So understanding what the goal is for those players, it's the same as understanding what the goal is for your high achievers, but also for your juniors. And in selling, it's all about experience. It's all about changing the mindset of the other person.
It was interesting, wasn't it, earlier on in what Juliet Denny said about training. The rewards for doing well in the training were not monetary. They were hugs or special, some kind of event to make a person feel special. I've seen an animation. Do go on the Royal Society of Arts site and see their animations about all sorts of topics. But there it looks at incentives, and in fact, it showed that the more you reward people with money in certain circumstances, in any field that requires judgment, the less well the performance becomes afterwards. It's astonishing. So that's a very important point. Kelvin.
Yes, we just to sort of give an illustration of that. We found again that monetary reward wasn't the prime motivator, but it's about getting to know your sales team, what's important to them. I remember we had a young girl, Lisa, who loved the theatre. She really, really loved it, but she got 2 kids at home, husband wasn't working, and they were kind of struggling. So one of the things that I did was I got to find out a little bit more about what Lisa wanted, what she loved doing, what her hobbies were, what her interests were. And I ended up, instead of paying her like £1,000 as a commission or a reward for her good work, what I did was I arranged for her and her husband to have a weekend away in London, going to the theatre, bought a VIP theatre tickets. And that experience, the cost of that was £500, £600, but it was less than giving a £1,000. But the experience that she gained from that, and the after effect, as it were, of that was massive, because she told all of her friends, told everybody in the office, and the motivational effect of that on her was incredible, and it much more than just handing over £1,000.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, if I can go back to the UPS case study, the interesting thing is the motivation to go to the Olympics enabled them to put up their sales targets above norm by about 40%.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so I was going to follow up. That goes down to you understanding the drivers behind what to offer the girl that got the tickets. It wasn't just about saying, right, let's set a bar, everyone's going to get a bonus if they achieve this in sales. It's really about personalizing it as much as you can to create experiences around something that money you maybe not want to spend yourself. Because most people will go home, irrespective of where they are. If they're high achievers, they've got big mortgages. So they go out and spend their money on their bills.
But bosses get busy. And they think when they've done the recruitment process, that's it done. How do you convince executives to keep paying attention to staff retention and enhancement and encouragement, the engagement thing we were talking about earlier on today?
I think that...
Can I just give you that one?
Sorry. Right, it's okay. I think that there's a whole series of things. I think the most important thing is I would go further than my colleagues, purely because I'm in a business where I know how to get hold of them, but I like one-off things that nobody else gets if you can do it. For example, I'm talking to somebody about, at the moment, where we're doing a tie-in with a wildlife park, and we're looking at doing an incentive program which will go through to the top salesperson actually seeing the birth of a gorilla and going out to see it being re-released into the wild in Rwanda, through to much lower levels about all sorts of things. Now, in that case, we're feeding on various different motivations of different staff. So if it's, for example, somebody who's really motivated by taking their family to do things, then we're not going to take them to Rwanda, but we can do some very unique experiences in terms of, you know, I don't know, enabling the whole family to actually feed, you know, animals that they don't normally feed, or stroke a rhino behind his ears, or all sorts of things. So it's very much about, I believe, tailoring to that individual, and ideally finding one source that can cover as many people as possible, so it doesn't become too expensive, too complicated, and too difficult. And then if you can tie that in, for example, with also using their database or other marketing, then you make very, very good value for money.
The word superstar, sales superstar, is in one of the subjects of this particular session there, but there has to be, doesn't there, scope for horses for courses, different members of your sales team on different things, especially in the context of what we heard earlier on about the continuing relationship with your customer being more and more important in the future. So it may not be just about one superstar salesperson maximizing sales, it might be about the continuing relationship as well. Is there scope for that?
If you think of, I'll use the football analogy again, you want 11 leaders on the pitch, but there's only one captain. So therefore you really want to build your core values that everyone's pulling in the right direction. The incentive for the girl, like you said, saw that as great value. She's now going to be an advocate of the company.
Yeah.
And utilizing incentives, but let's not just say it's all about paying the sales team more. It's about putting processes in place that will help them. A salesperson really wants to close the sale at the end. They want the marketing team to do the job to tee it up, using the analogy of the golf. The marketing team to tee it up, and then the salesperson takes the glory and closes the deal. So if you're looking at your team, how do you help them? Understand more about what is it their perfect process in the business. What would they really like?
Well, Kevin, speak to that, because again, the advice was avail of these tools. Some of these tools can be quite simple. They can be automation tools. Just make it easy for me to understand and get a grip with my diary. Are executive officers aware of this?
I think they're having to become more aware of it. I think in the level that I typically deal with, I think that is a struggle, because they are typically quite blinkered and focused on their company, and looking outside of that, what's really going on, is quite hard. Those things where social media, for example, is prevalent, is typically in the lower ranks. And I think you've got to look for those leaders where there's an atypical approach. You know, the most successful leaders, the likes of Richard Branson, etc., are clearly, you know, using social media. And you know, those that they're setting the example, they're setting the bar. And I think other C-suite leaders need to, again, pull into that and become part of that, engage with their community.
Yes, I'd agree with that. I mean, because I come from a sponsorship perspective, I find it somewhat different in that people have decided that they wish to be seen as more sustainable or environmentally friendly, or they have all sorts of other objectives in terms of product demonstration or whatever it might be. So and good sponsorship crosses the whole company. Therefore, if you then say to the C-suite executive, and we can do sales incentives, and that will help to drive sales on the back of the sponsorship and reduce the cost, then they start to see it as value for money. And I think the moment you talk to C-suite about value for money, especially if you talk to the CFO, that's always a good starting point in discussion.
Sometimes it seems to me that this isn't just about executives having to do something, but sometimes freeing their subordinates to do something they would naturally do, like the social selling, like the getting involved with social media.
Yeah, I go back to the core values of the business, but the executives really in the company, if we're talking about us selling stuff, the executives in our company really should be setting the example and doing the work that they expect someone else to do, but just tailoring the work, tailoring the process for the individual personality types. If we're focusing on salespeople and we're looking at, we want the sales director, he should really understand what his sales managers are like. The sales managers should understand what their sales team are like. The chief exec doesn't need to know all the salespeople, he needs to know what his directors are like. That's how a business structure is working. You just need to know the people below you are really like to make sure that the business is driven, everyone's got the same core values, and we drive it forward.
Well, listen, you have split it up, but it still sounds like an awful lot of work.
Well, okay, so I only need to know my sales director, my HR director, my operations director. So there are only, in the process management team, yes, I will get to speak to the sales and the sales team, but ultimately my work is understanding and delivering what they want, pulling it in the right direction of the business. The sales director's really got to understand what his sales team's like. What do they want? What will help them close more business? And I don't use the word selling that often, I use the word solving. I want to solve the problem of the customer. I then want to take them from the need to the want. Because we know that people don't take action if it's just what they need.
C-suite needs to know that it's got to be nimble and flexible and forward-thinking.
Yes, indeed. I mean, one of the strategies we've adopted is, we hear about organizations having mission statements and so on. Actually, one of the most successful things we did in our company, it was about 12 years ago, we created a passion statement. And we did that by going out to all of the employees and asking them what they really loved about their job. And we kind of amalgamated that together. We created this passion statement, and that became part of the ethos of our business. It was, here's what you are buying into. When you join our company, this is what you need to buy into. This is what we expect you to buy into. And if there isn't a fit there, then probably, we aren't the right company for you. So that passion statement, pervades actually through pretty much everything we do, because we are passionate about what we do. I think that has to come down from C-level down. I think the C-suite need to understand what that passion is and make sure that that is being developed and sustained, within the organization. And that comes down to, again, coming back to understanding what your staff need, what your salespeople really need, what they want in terms of delivering incentives to them that make sense for them. Again, personalizing that experience, taking care to look after your staff. Now, it's easier in a smaller organization than it is in a much larger organization. However, to come back to the processes, I think that is something that you can evolve in a much larger organization.
I have to say I'm all in favour of something that sounds as exciting as the passion statement. Sounds a lot more fun than a mission statement any day. But as far as are you noticing any effects from that? Are you noticing increased sales? Was there a before and after, and what were the results of that?
Yeah, the results are basically greater retention of staff, and we already heard earlier about the cost of people leaving and recruiting new people. I think we've increased our retention from typically around 4 or 5 years to maybe 8 or 9.
So you weren't surprised by that statistic we saw earlier, which said
Not
that,
at all.
what was it, 66% of your workforce is out of the door within 2 years?
Well, I think
true?
Yeah, I think for our company as well that we're a relatively small business. We're under 50 employees, but and we know we can't compete with the likes of the Capgemini and Ernst & Young, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and we do get people that leave our company to go to those organisations. Which is great. We understand that we are a stepping stone effectively to them, but we give them great training and personal development along the way, and that's the value that we can bring to those people. We kind of keep them motivated. We know we're not going to keep them forever. I mean, I think C-suite has to understand exactly where you are in that life cycle, career cycle of those individuals. You will not keep everybody forever.
I'm going back this way. You were nodding a lot there.
Yeah,
Can you give us a before and after story?
It's a good point, and particularly knowing where you are in your business.
Yeah.
So if I can get a high performance out of a salesperson for 5 years, knowing that he's then going to go on somewhere else or start his own business, which a lot of salespeople have the desire to start their own business, but just don't have the capital. So it's the next best thing to owning your own business. You're accountable for it. You can go out and win business. So a lot of salespeople want to start their own business. If I can get 5 years out of them and they're going to bring me millions, and I'm paying them well, and they're happy, and they are an advocate, I'll take 5 years. I will train them, I'll mentor them, I'll coach them, and I will let them flourish elsewhere. Because I can't give them what they want in their life, mission and vision. But I can give them 5 years, and they can give me 5 years back.
Richard?
Yes, I think there's some nuances in this whole thing. So, for example, when we're talking about young sales staff, money does play it, so they can buy their sports car or whatever. I think as they get older, then things like memorable experiences come into play and things like that. But equally, I think there's a distinction, for example, with people who've got families. And I think that it's an area that's been quite interesting me lately. For example, why do companies spend money on Christmas parties? Who wants to go to them? I'm not saying people don't want to go to them, but I'm not convinced it can be justified when there could be more imaginative alternatives. One of the things I'm talking to somebody about at the moment is actually, and Americans do it, but they do it in their offices, is actually doing a family Christmas party with employees and when they've got kids. But we're talking about doing it in association with a local theatre and doing it actually alongside their pantomime, and then having things for the kids with makeup and mock sword fights and all those sorts of things. Why do we have to have Christmas parties? I'm not saying it's not right for everybody, but I'm actually not sure what it delivers. What do you think it delivers?
Yeah. I didn't like Christmas parties because I'd always bump into Nick Robinson, and my mother can't tell us apart, so it's quite miserable. Although I did once get chatted up by a very attractive studio manager, and we were chatting away for ages and ages, and I only tweaked on the end when I said, I really must go back home to my wife now. She said, it was lovely meeting you, and I'd love to work with you again sometime, Nick. Thank you very much. What an ego boost that was. I'm not sure what they're for either. I think we might move at this point of the conversation into, the actual deal-making process. So you've sorted out your team, you're incentivizing the team, you're thinking in the long term, you're thinking about that continuing relationship. How much a part should C-suite now be taking in deal negotiation, deal sourcing, and closing the deal? Obviously, we'll take that in order.
I guess it depends on the size and value of the sale. You can't expect a senior executive to have the time, based on the original point, to go after transactional-based sales, unless it's a significant partnership, maybe. If you're partnering a company, then that person would be getting involved. But ultimately, all of the selling is about solving, and if you can create that experience, and usually someone of seniority has more experience to relate to a conversation. So therefore, they will be able to bring up contacts, friends, so you wheel out a CEO because he has done more, seen more, or has more authority. So when we worked with a company called SAP, who are a large CRM, ERP company, they would bring out the exec on, let's say, £10 million deals and over. If it was less than that, it would be just a sales exec. If it was less than that, the sales manager. I mean, it wasn't a strict rule, but it was because the senior, the chief exec of that particular division could correlate with the chief exec of, let's say, Pricewaterhouse. Whereas the salesperson wouldn't have that same stature. So we put that process in. There had to be some parameters around it to manage his time. And it would be similar going down to incentives. The incentives not only work internally, but they work externally. So a customer, for example, one of the deals that we wanted to win with a large, similar to Capgemini, I won't mention the name, we couldn't get a meeting. So what we did was hire a Bugatti called up the senior exec and said, you can drive the Bugatti to work, that's my meeting. That experience,
Good idea.
he won't forget. We got the meeting and got the transaction based on starting that relationship.
It depends is going to be the answer for this. And I know, for example, you have wheeled out your chief exec or a senior executive officer. Was he or she a celebrity as well? At the get-go, didn't you want to get some traction on the project?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just slightly change that if I may.
Sure.
Because I've got an example of something where NetWest did a big sponsorship of contemporary art at the Royal Academy for a number of years. And the whole objective of doing it was to be able to network with C-suite executives and members of Parliament. It wasn't a direct sales thing quite, but it wasn't far off. The reason Ernst & Young sponsored contemporary art shows is that they actually wanted to cross-sell between divisions. So one division invited guests, another division, and then they introduced each other. So it got to the extent where they ended up quite often, and they've been doing this for 20 odd years, they might have as many as 45 different corporate hospitality functions in, say, Tate Modern or wherever, during their 4-month sponsorship, from 700 people on one occasion to another occasion when they had the whole board of a FTSE 100 company flew in from Germany to have a private dinner for something like 16 people in the Tate Gallery. So they were using it in all sorts of ways. And I think that's very important. So part of the reason, in my opinion, that cricket is so popular as a sponsorship is it's very likely to rain. And if you get the chief executive there, you'd like to be captive for about 6 hours with alcohol. So it should work quite well.
Kelvin, any ideas on when you start getting the C-suite involved?
Yeah, so I think basically, it goes back to some, real old school sales techniques. Find out where these people hang out. It's as simple as that. I mean, if you're looking, just to take an example, if you're looking for more kind of celebrity type endorsements for your products or services or for your company, and you want to get a foot in the door with those, go and subscribe to the handbook. I don't know how many people have come across that. It's a minimal cost per month because that tells you what all the events are, where the celebrity is going to be hanging out, etc., etc. If you can engage there and you can start to bring your your CEOs into that. This comes back to something that was touched on earlier: personal branding. Branding by association is one of those other things that you can utilize to create your profile as a salesperson. Now that actually will help you to get your foot in the door then with C-level suite executives, because again they'll say, oh guy, this guy or this lady is like really important, she's hanging out with the right people, maybe I talk to her or him. So I think that's something else that you can do, and that's a kind of a key takeaway. I think the other thing is it's not always about the C-level exec being involved. I mean, as Luke was talking about, depends on the level of the deal. Find out what the budgetary limits are for the people that you're talking to, because if they don't have the capacity to sign off the deal, why are you talking to them? Why, go to the next level. And again, some of the old school sales tactics, go and talk to the PAs, go and talk to the secretaries, go and talk to the people who actually will know that information but are not actually the people directly in the line, and probably wouldn't give you the time of day. But you can come in through the back door. And Ian earlier, I think, alluded to that in the previous panel. Go and look up what these people are interested in, who they hang out with, who their PAs are.
Yeah, it's very interesting that what I've noticed in the last 2 or 3 years is the number of really top C-suite executives who are really into cycling. And the moment, and you think, is there really a commercial reason for them to spend that much money? But they actually really believe in it, they really like it. And what we were referring to is that we've been doing some work for Matt Pryor, the ex-England cricketer, and he's formed a professional cycling team. And a combination of cycling and a well-known cricketer got through so many doors, I couldn't believe it. And not only do C-suite executives cycle, but they quite a lot of them cycle together. So if you get in with one, you end up getting in with about 20 or 30. And they have a completely different perspective because it's like a little social group. They feel they're being active, which they are, and it's a very interesting phenomenon. It's far more effective than, say, rugby or golf. It's got a whole different feel to it, and it's only come up in the last 2 or 3 years since people have started to cycle a lot more.
Which of you fellas was talking to me about the need for, especially with technology projects, if you're selling a big technology product into a company, you're talking to one set of people, but those people don't have the purse strings, so now you need to involve your C-suite and the internal champion, did you say, to talk to their C-suite.
I mean, there's two sides of this. There's the executives from the sales company, i.e. your company, and then there's the executives from the customer. And there's always going to be a debate of who do you target? Do you target at the top, or do you start lower down, who may have asked for the quote or gives you some insight? You have to find your sponsor. If we're going completely cold, if I was to look for if I wanted to win a $10 million transaction within BP, I'd set a time frame, a budget, a process, but I would start at the top and lower down at the same time and work my way to the middle. In most IT sales, the finance director is the one that gives the CIO his budget. So if I used to sell technology, that was what I used to do, and I was always targeting the CIO. That was all I ever did, CIO, CIO, CIO. And I'd get right to the end of the sales cycle and he wouldn't have budget. He'd say he would, but he wouldn't have budget. And it wasn't until I learned how to read financial accounts, because I had to learn to read them so I can converse with the finance director. Then I could start talking to a finance director about cash flow, profit and loss, what's on the balance sheet. Then he would then refer me down. And once I've got a referral, the doors start to open. But there is no right and wrong in selling, in my opinion. It's really just about using experience and other people's experience and learning today, which is why I'm here today, to learn more, to cut down on my process, to improve the conversion ratio, to reduce my cost, and win more business.
Kelvin, shall we have a brief look at this point at the difference between selling to public authorities and private companies? I'm guessing there's a lot more of a headache with selling to public institutions.
Yes, so I think public sector in general, and I am generalizing here, I think there is a wide breadth of, shall we say, skill, but also sign-off levels within different areas of public sector organizations. Our preference would always be to go to private enterprise, because I think we can make that more targeted. I think there's more available information. For example, one of the things that I do, if I'm talking to a group of execs about portfolio strategy, one of the things I do is I'll go and get their annual report, and I'll read that, and I'll take out some key elements of that. And in that discussion, in that meeting, I'll ask them, well, what are their key challenges? What are they facing in terms of their business? What are the key challenges they're facing right now? And I'll get some answers back, and then I'll say, great, that's fine. And what is your organisation here for? What is your perception on what you're here for? And they'll give me some answers, and I'll say, well, that's really interesting, because actually that is different to what is in your annual report. And this is what you're selling to your stakeholders. Let's look at that. The point of that is that it starts that discussion. It's a conversation starter, it's a discussion starter with the senior execs, because actually it highlights a potential issue that actually what they thought they were doing is not what they're telling people they're doing. Do you understand the difference? So what's in the annual report is not actually what they are doing. And what they are doing might be great, it's just that they're doing great things, but with the wrong focus. So they're very good at doing what they're doing, but they're just doing the wrong things. And I find that fairly frequently, actually, in quite a few fairly large organizations. And so we then have that conversation that takes us on to the next stage.
Gentlemen, have a little think about what gaps we've left in this conversation and stand by to deliver some sort of plug for that. But can I just look into the audience and see any questions at this point for about what we've heard, enhancing them, or even some anecdotes about this gentleman over here?
Yeah, interesting what you're saying. I agree with everything you've been saying. One thing that I've observed is that the new generation of sales do not know how to engage and see them. They spend so much time on product training. This is certainly the technology companies. And a simple way of trying to get the message across is often say people who know how work for people who know why. And it's my favourite word in sales is why. And I often find that salespeople do not know how to have a why conversation with the C-suite. In other words, they don't know how to sell policy. They're selling procedure. They're selling to middleman. They're selling a product which is geared for the company. They just don't know how to sell policy. I don't know if you find that experience that salespeople are not good at selling policy sales, and they're not good at engaging and having conversation with C-level.
I guess it goes back down to the training process of it, and not doing a blanket training. You know, for the training is the same for everyone. It's not. There are different levels of salespeople, and it's interesting that I always see when I go into companies just to advise them on sales improvement. I'm not a coach, I'm not a trainer. I look at their rolling out training the same for everybody. Some people are really good at new business. Some people are really good at networking. Some people are really good at conversing with C-levels. Everyone's on the same pay grade. They're all in the same bucket, and they're all trained the same way, which is crazy. So going right back to the individualizing with everyone and setting up a process in your business to identify and to make sure everyone's measurable and everyone's rewarded. A new business person should be rewarded for the lifespan of that account. As an example, I'm not saying that's the way to do it, but they should then hand over to an account manager. Well, what happens is, in many businesses, the new business person becomes the account manager because they don't want to relinquish it. I'm not very good at account management. I just want to do new business. I want to win the client, unless it's such a challenging customer that keeps my brain active, that I want to do more. I want to solve more problems. If not, I need to hand it over to someone at a slower pace, and they may be brilliant at relationships. They may be brilliant at conversing with the C-suite. But I identify that that's not something I want to do. It doesn't fit with my own personal goals. I want to do this, and you've got to understand your sales team and align it. And it's same with the training. That's in my opinion. If you align that with the training and making sure that your training process, okay, what is your goals? What do you want to do? What do you like doing? Do you like new business? Do you like account management? Do you want it easy? Do you want it hard? Do you like, what incentives? What processes do you want in your business? How can I help you? How can marketing help you? How can we incentivize marketing? How can marketing come on the journey with you?
Sure. Well, listen, briefly, that question I asked you, what gaps you want to plug at this point? What haven't we talked about that is quite useful information for executive officers, and how to interact with executive officers?
Well, it's sort of following on from that point really, but it highlights a gap. I mean, don't be afraid to walk away from a customer. We've done that in the past simply because either they're not ready for the kind of technology platform that we are selling, they're not at the right level of maturity, or simply because, frankly, they're a pain in the backside. Mm-hmm. And you all know that you have difficult customers, okay? Even in the sales cycle, in the pre-sales process, you will get to know whether is this customer actually going to be a real nightmare to work with. And I've had discussions with my team. We'll often make that decision, and sometimes it's actually me that will ring up the customer and say, "I'm sorry, we don't feel that we're in a position to work with you at this point in time." And the reaction is, "Oh my God, you're turning down this major contract with us. Why is that?" And then we have that conversation about, well, we don't feel that your organization is a mature enough organization in terms of your processes at this point in time. There are some gaps that you need to identify in the organization and go away and rectify before we feel that actually the technology would work for you. Now, for us, that is one of the things that we identify, because actually we want successful customers. We want to have case studies that are successful. We want to make sure that we have a good track record with our customers. And the only way to ensure that is to make sure that we have, basically good customers that are a good fit for the product or service that we're selling, and that they are equally on board with that approach.
Briefly, Richard, sum up.
Yeah, I would agree to an extent. I think that you've got two types of difficult customers, one of whom is motivated by lack of identity, power, whatever. And you've got to get the right person to deal with them, because actually what they're wanting is to be challenged, and then they can quite often roll over and be pussycats. But it's only when you've got enough confidence and ability to smooth them over. And then, of course, there's the ones who really are a nightmare, and you don't want to have anything to do with them. But there are people who deliberately try and challenge you, often other salespeople, who want to challenge you, and they want you to win the argument, and then they will roll over and give you the business. But you need the right salesperson to deal with them.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree with that.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for telling us about these things. Richard and Luke and Kelvin, a warm round of applause for them, please. Thank you very much. Thanks, gentlemen. Very good indeed. Yeah.